All right, so welcome everyone to our collaborative crop planning webinar. We have an hour agenda ahead of us. I always like to share the agenda. My name is Madeline. I use she, her pronouns. I am Oregon Farm Corps' collaborative farming specialist. Um, like I said, you might know us as Rogue Farm Corps. We just did a rebrand because we started 20 years ago in the Rogue Valley. We are now a statewide organization. We felt like changing the name would better represent what we do and who we serve. So new name, same mission, same folks, same staff. Um, Oregon Farm Corps has been around, like I said, for 20 years. We do primarily beginner farmer training, but our newest branch of programming is our collaborative farming work, and that is me. It's a department of one. I've been with the org for 2.5 years now, and we do a variety of things that I'll get to in a second, one of which is webinars like these. And so I'm going to do a little intro about our work. I'm going to share two case studies, and I'll share the links for all of this too, both in the chat and in a follow-up email. Two case studies of collaborative crop planning that I first came across when I was exploring and researching this topic. And then we're going to pass it over to our lovely guest speakers for them to talk about their experience with collaborative crop planning, how that's worked for them and the organizations that they work with. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. At any point, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I will try my best to keep track of that and facilitate any Q&A that gets missed when we get there. All right, oh, I added this. So the last couple times I've done collaborative farming webinars, I've forgotten to do this, and I wanted to recenter it in the work that we share. Collaboration, the principles of collaboration and cooperation are not novel or new concepts. They have been central to cultures outside of Western American imperialist culture for centuries. And as we collectively explore ways to integrate this way of thinking into our practices, into our work as farmers, I always feel it's important to acknowledge and recognize the cultural origins, the cultures that have been practicing interdependence and collaboration for centuries. In particular, I like to shout out and acknowledge the history of cooperatives and farming in Black cultures in America. They have been doing this because it is part of their culture and because they were explicitly excluded from accessing resources that white farmers were allowed access to. And I always like to just center us in that, acknowledge it before we start talking about how we are starting to rethink collaboration as part of our practices as modern day farmers. All right, so what does Oregon Farm Corps do in terms of supporting collaborative farming? One of the things we do is provide networking and educational opportunities for farmers, like webinars like these. I am excited to announce that on December 9th, it has not been promoted yet. This is my first promotion. We are holding a Corvallis area in-person networking event for collaborative farming. So you can look out on our social media, our listserv. If you're subscribed to our newsletter, you'll see the advert go out there. We built a resource library. I will plug that at multiple points. I have published an entire resource library on our website that has case studies and all sorts of resources tailored to farmers. I'm a farmer myself. I know how busy it is. I tried my best to tailor everything on the website to just the best things that I think would be most relevant to the farmers in our network. And then our newest area of programming under collaborative farming is our consulting program, which is a one-on-one program where you work with us and then free contracted professionals that we received grant funding to get time with to help take whatever collaborative farming idea you have from idea to inception to legally incorporate your business entity, to get your book set up, to make sure that you have everything that you need to get going on whatever collaborative project idea you might have. So if you have a collaborative project already in mind, or you have an idea for one, you want to talk about it, you want to see if you might be a good fit for this program, I encourage you to reach out to me. My email will be at the end. We are taking clients for this program on an ongoing basis. Okay, amazing. 5 minutes flat. We did it. So let's move into the topic at hand, collaborative crop planning. Why collaborate on a crop plan at all? When I think about this topic, I think about these four kind of main points of benefits that you might experience as a farmer for collaborating on a crop plan. The first, and I think this is the biggest reason why folks collaborate on crop planning, is to access potentially larger markets. So a lot of us who are doing sustainable, organic, regenerative farming are doing it on a small scale. And it can be really difficult, if not impossible, to imagine ourselves accessing larger wholesale client accounts. I'm thinking like farms into school, farm to institution, um, universities, prisons, all these sort of systems that buy um, produce on big scales. How could we possibly ever reach those markets if we're only growing on maybe 5, 10 acres max? Um, so that's one reason why people collaboratively crop plan is you can partner with other farms. I can grow the X amount, you can grow X amount together. Perhaps we can pitch under one account to these larger wholesale clients. There's also larger CSA offerings that you can do if you're collaboratively crop planning that you might not be able to do on your own. You can reduce unnecessary competition in shared markets. I haven't heard as many examples of this, but I think it's a really cool idea. There's a lot of potential for collaborating on crop planning so that you are more strategic about who's selling what if you're at the same farmer's market. If you perhaps are selling to the same restaurant accounts so that you're not having to undercut each other to try and sell that same order of asparagus. Well, you focus on asparagus, I'll focus on radicchio, just an example of how that might look. It also allows you to specialize. If you are growing all of the crops for a CSA on your own, you might be growing 40, 50 different varieties. If you collaborate with another farm, you're growing 20, they're growing 20, you still offer the same thing to the customer, and you're able to specialize. There's fewer inefficiencies on the farm. And then the last, and I think most underrated one, is that you can build strong relationships and trust with other farmers. It opens the potential for all kinds of other forms of collaboration. I think that just starting a relationship on co-planning a crop plan is a great way to build trust, to see how you work with another farmer through the season, to experience what that relationship looks like. And it could open up avenues for you to perhaps, I think we work together really well. Like maybe we should start a marketing co-op together, like co-pack items together, do some value add stuff together. Maybe we jointly hire a delivery driver together. You start to build the trust in the relationship. Okay. Two case studies real quick before I pass it over that I thought really interesting. And again, I'm going to pass these or put these links in the chat. The Seattle Wholesale Growers Market is a co-op of flower growers in the Seattle area. They have 15 member farmers. And they were finding that they needed to balance what farmers were bringing to the co-op with what purchasers wanted to see. They weren't getting the variety they wanted, and at certain times the market was flooded with all the same of one particular type of flower. And so the co-op actually hired someone on staff to help coordinate this. They have mandatory biannual meetings with each grower where they allocate what they call market shares based on seniority and proven growing records. So the longer a farm has been around and the more it's been proven to successfully bring a certain quality of crop to market, the more market shares it gets to then get to pick what it wants to bring. And that's what helps them balance out who's bringing what to market. So that's one example. And you're going to see that a lot of the times with coordinated crop planning, there's the need to bring an external party on board to help facilitate the process. It can be really difficult for farmers to facilitate this process themselves. And also, it can be more appealing to the outside purchaser to see that there is a coordinated effort. There's someone who can represent everyone on board. And it's not like a wholesale client's looking at you like, oh, it's just a text thread with 15 farmers. No, you have someone front facing who's able to pitch what you have and coordinate everything behind the scenes. Because it's really difficult to be a farmer, period. It's more difficult to be a farmer and then try to coordinate communication around crop planning and then communicating that to a potential buyer as well. Another really cool case study that I found, it's called the Local Harvest CSA, and they have been around for over 20 years now. They wrote a guidebook that I am going to share with you. It's a really incredible guidebook. They really get into the nitty-gritty if that's something that you're interested in. They started a cooperative CSA. So it was organized as a co-op. And it was a bunch of local vegetable farmers, mixed veg farmers that wanted to do a CSA together. And obviously, I think there were like maybe six different farmers at first. So there was a need to figure out who was going to grow what for this CSA. And we're going to hear more about this too from our guest speakers. And the way that they chose to do this was as a co-op, they jointly hired a part-time seasonal coordinator, and they developed this really intricate crop bidding system that evolved over the years, where they were able to bid on what crops they wanted to grow and what quantities and at what price. And then collectively, because they were a co-op, decided on what price they were going to pay, the standards for packing, the quality, so that customers would never know at any given week if this spinach had come from this farm or this farm. It would be the same quality and packaging of spinach at the same price offered across the board. And the farmers were able to bid through the facilitation of their coordinator on how much of what they wanted to grow. And again, I'll go to the next screen. I think it's talked about here. The awarding of the bids was also based on like seniority and the past production. And so you'll see that here on these bidding guidelines that they have a pretty cool process they ended up settling on for how they allocated who was going to grow what for their cooperative CSA. And then there was space too as seasons fluctuated. The coordinator checks in with them like, are you actually on track to meet your bid? If not, they had a process for who was going to fill in the gaps on that bid. I really highly recommend if you're interested in collaborative crop planning for CSAs. This guidebook is incredible. It is a little long, but it's fairly easy to skip through the sections that might be relevant to you. The last resource that I don't have a slide for, but I think was an interesting listen, is the Collaborative Farming Podcast had an episode with someone from the Tennessee Young Farmers Coalition, I think it's called, and she did some coordinated crop planning for them as well, and shared her experience with trying to facilitate coordinated crop planning with local growers to meet institutional needs. I'm going to drop all those resources, like I said, in the chat and in a follow-up email. I thought those were just some really interesting case studies to get us started before I pass it over to our guest speakers. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. It's saying, are you able to chat? It's telling me perhaps not. I don't know. I'm hoping if you can't chat, put your hit or you could, oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, amazing. Drop any questions you have in the chat about this and I'll get to it at the end. But before we answer any questions, I just want to get through all the speakers. So that's my email. Feel free to write it down. I'm sure you'll hear from me after this, so you'll have my email. Um, but without further ado, I think I'm going to pass it over to Katie Swanson, who is our first speaker. She is a farmer. Her farm is Sweet Union Farm, and she's going to talk to us about, from the farmer perspective, what it's been like being a participant in coordinated crop planning, what that's looked like for her farm, the pros and cons from her perspective.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Um, okay, so I don't present on webinars very often, so I'm going to be probably a little awkward, but my name is Katie Swanson. I'm Sweet Union Farm, like Madeline said. I'm located in Klamath Falls, which is like South Central Oregon. Um, and we are in the high desert climate. So we're at about 4,000 feet, pretty short growing season. Um, Medium-sized town. Um, and I grow on my actual growing space is like 1 acre. Um, and I moved onto a larger farm a few years ago. Before that point, before I moved, I was on a smaller, more like suburban lot and then renting different lots. And I was doing CSA. So CSA was like my heart. I was like so passionate, and I still am passionate about CSA. And that was the main thing I did. So I was growing about 50 different crops, probably like 100 varieties within that. Um, and when I moved to my current location, I decided I needed to simplify a little bit. I was finishing up 5 years of farming, and so my initial like beginner farmer energy was a little it was gone. So I felt like I wanted to simplify, grow fewer crops. So I was kind of heartbroken about it, but I stopped doing my own CSA. And I decided to grow more for farmers market and then my restaurant accounts. Um, so yeah, so this is I just finished up my ninth season running Sweet Union Farm. Um, so there was a few reasons personally that I wanted to simplify, but I also felt like we were in a pretty intense drought. And I was really doing some soul searching about like what made sense for me to grow. And I decided also kind of for, I guess, like environmental resiliency reasons, didn't really make sense for me to literally grow everything, especially in our 90-degree day growing season. Um, so I also was thinking about like what actually makes sense for me to grow on my farm, on my land, with my water situation and my climate. Um, so I wanted to get really specific about what made the most sense. Um, so again, that was kind of a reason to go away from CSA, doing CSA myself. Um, so then, kind of meanwhile, I I'm also involved in our local food hub. Um, Klamath Grown is our local food hub, and I we could have a whole webinar about how food hubs are an example of collaborative crop planning. But more specifically, Klamath Grown was starting a collaborative CSA. And kind of putting my Klamath Grown hat on just for a second, the reason behind that was a little bit different. So there wasn't an abundance of competition. There wasn't like too many CSA farms and they were all competing with each other. It was actually a problem that CSA farms weren't making it for very long. And so when I was doing a CSA, I always had a wait list and there was more demand than I could keep up with. And I was typically either the only one or one of two farms that were doing a CSA. Um, and every CSA that I had heard about before that point had only lasted a few years. So I think I was like one of the longest running CSAs, and I only did it for 5 years in Klamath Falls. Kind of just speaks to, yeah, there was a need, there was a demand in the community, but the farmers really, it was just like it was not working for the farmers to kind of hold up their own CSA and doing everything. So um, plus kind of the environmental factors, we were going through lots of drought, smoke, heat, lots of stuff going on. Um, so I actually ended up kind of consulting for Klamath Grown and helping them set up this collaborative CSA. So let's see, this last season was the first like full season. They call it the Harvest Box program. The year before was like a really small scale pilot of the program, and it was grant funded. Um, and so anyway, so because I consulted on this project, anything that I complain about is my own fault. So anyway, so now I'm just going to speak from kind of what it was like as a farmer to participate in this. So the idea was this Harvest Box is like a collaborative CSA pulling from multiple farms, not only in Klamath Falls, but also from neighboring regions when needed, when it wasn't something that was directly competing with local farmers, but we needed to fill a gap. Um, it was 16 weeks long. Um, and yeah, so the food hub, so people could pick up their box at the food hub pickup location or get it delivered to their door, which is an option with the food hub's online market anyway. So I just made a list of pros and cons for me, kind of having been through this season. Carrie is going to talk, I think, about the food hub side and how like planning and all that stuff went. So I'm just going to talk of what kind of experience I had as a farmer. So here's the pros for me as a farmer for participating in this like collaborative Harvest Box program. Um, I think the most obvious is you get to participate in the CSA model without having to do literally everything. You don't have to grow everything. You don't have to do all of the customer service, the pickup, there's so many details to running a CSA, the newsletter, the education, getting recipes out there. There's just tons of coordination, as most farmers know. There's the business side, right? So the food hub is that like third party that's managing all of these things. They're selling the boxes, They're putting a really great newsletter. They made some educational videos. There's a lot of educational stuff going out that me as an individual just couldn't have pulled off. Um, and it also allowed me to focus on my best crops. So I could really think about like what makes the most sense for me to kind of put out there. Um, I was also able to take into account what other people were growing. So there is a winter session where we do our like collaborative spreadsheet of like, this is what everybody is planning to grow. We do our best guess. Like we'll have broccoli in these months and tomatoes in these months. And so those conversations were incredibly helpful. And because we're a pretty small community and there's actually not that many veggie growers, it also carried over to the farmers market. Like we were basically collaboratively planning our farmers market as well at the same time because it was kind of all the same people. Um, and so like the best example I have is one grower was like, I'm going big on potatoes this year. I'm growing a whole acre of potatoes. And I was like, really good to know. I will not be growing a bunch of potatoes. And so that actually really saved me this year. That was a big deal for me. I grew like one type of fingerling potato and sold that, and I didn't try to reach for more. But there were some other things that they weren't growing that I was like, great, I'm excited to grow that. So yeah, like I said, it allows me to focus on what I do best. I do feel like overall there's like definitely a good kind of climate change adaptation argument to make for programs like this. Like, and that was part of the grant when we applied to fund this is like um, me being able to do what I do best with the resources that I have really does help me adapt to how the climate is changing around me. And some people have better water rights than others. Some people have like a colder, they're in like a little microclimate, colder microclimate. There's so many things like that. So that specialization, while again, having biodiversity, of course, is important, but like we're talking going from 50 crops to 20. So um, it also allowed me to really like sell my vegetables to a wider audience, which food hubs just do in general. But they were marketing to employers, the hospital, things like that. And together we could do more harvest boxes, right? So that kind of program is more possible. Um, and let's see. The other thing that's just like a little logistical detail that was really, really important was we set up the schedule so that, and the farmers had a ton of input on how this was designed. Like the schedule, when do we get our pick list? Like what weeks do we want to do this? We changed we started later and went later this year based on like what the farmers wanted to do. Um, and one really important thing for me is to know what they want from me for the harvest box before I go to farmers market. So I could tell them like, here's what I have, and then I would find out by Thursday what they wanted from me. And then I could confidently harvest on Friday for farmers market and know what I needed to hold back, which is like, I think probably most important for small scale farms like mine. I don't have just like endless, uh, amounts of broccoli. Like I would need to hold back how much broccoli I harvest for farmers market in order to have enough for harvest box. So that information was really important at the right time. Um, and then it was good to connect with other growers. Like I think it's kind of like Madeline was talking about. I think we can kind of get sucked into this like competitive mindset. But I think it's really, really important that we work together. And I think we all do better when we work together and we're in communication. And you end up just kind of like sharing like tidbits with each other that are super helpful or whatever. So I just think the more community we can have with other growers, the better. And this is one way to do that. Um, my packing was more efficient. Even though I am just like a 1 acre farm, one of my pet peeves is to pack a tiny order. And so to be able to know if they were getting my kale, I was sending a few cases of kale was like really, really nice. So just it made my packing more efficient. Um, let's see. The other thing that I appreciated was we were able to communicate beyond kind of the spreadsheet of the crop planning. We were able to communicate to Klamath Grown, here are the like top priority crops for me. Like I really want to contribute this crop. Like I have all these other things, but like I'll be really bummed if you don't take my salad mix. Like this is the most important one for me. So I really like that. Um, so anyway, tons of benefits. Some of the downsides or maybe things we need to like I would like to improve on for next year. Um, so as the farmer, I wish they would have sold more harvest boxes. They didn't sell as many as they planned to or wanted to. We only sold 35. And so I really wanted those numbers to be higher. And so that's just a bummer. And when I was doing my winter planning, like, and yeah, so like when I did my own CSA, I would have people re-sign up in fall before winter started, and I would have a pretty decent idea. But the way that it's working right now with Klamath Grown is they're selling the boxes in spring. And so we really don't know how many boxes to plant for. And so I'm a little bit more cautious to plant things specifically for the Harvest Box program because it's just not at the quantity that would merit that. So I'm limited to things that I kind of grow enough of anyway for farmers market or my other markets. Um, I'm really interested in kind of that bidding system that you talked about. I think that's really complicated. Um, Basically, when your product isn't chosen for the harvest box the next week, it's a bummer. You're like, "Ah, I really could have gotten rid of 35 bunches of kale." Um, and they can only, so they're picking and choosing from everybody's availability. Um, so I think it's complicated on how to navigate that. So I think there's some work to be done there. And like wanting everything to be fair is almost impossible, right? So that was just a tricky part, and there was just some weeks where I was like, oh dang it. Um, then kind of along those same lines, basically there's three growers that produce pretty consistent salad mix. And so what we ended up doing was kind of splitting it up amongst ourselves. Um, which salad mix is a big crop for me. I would love to just supply the salad mix for the whole harvest box. I know I could do it. I have enough. So having to split it with other growers, again, I'm like, yes, that is more fair. And I think that's probably the best way to do it right now. But again, it's a bummer. Um, let's see. It's an adjustment, I think, just overall when you're selling through Food Hub to when you're going from a direct to consumer farm and you're really used to having those relationships with your customers to send something off into a CSA that you don't get to see those people, right? Which there's like a benefit to that because you're saving time. But at the same time, there's just like that relational piece of the CSA I definitely miss sometimes. Um, and if the customers aren't reading their newsletter, because the newsletter does a great job saying you got, this crop from this farm, and they do a little bio on the farm, and it's great. But if the customer doesn't read the newsletter, my vegetables aren't all labeled. Like my salad mix is labeled, so it's obvious when they got Sweet Union salad mix, but that's about it. So there's not always that like direct connection. Um, let's see. I would say the other thing that I find interesting is that I did CSA in my first 5 years. Um, and I've gotten better at adjusting my prices in order to pay myself. But I think if there's any farmers on here, they know how hard that is. And so in hindsight, I was undercharging for my CSA and I had a really long wait list. And so when an organization like Klamath Grown that has paid staff comes in and develops a product like this, they have to pay their staff. And so the CSA box is more expensive. And so I think that has been a barrier when it felt like there was all this demand for CSA, but when it came down to it, maybe not as many people were willing to pay what it actually costs. And so I think that's interesting. And it also, in some ways, makes it slightly less accessible. But then at the same time, Clams Grown can apply for grants, and they have to get CSA boxes to people experiencing food insecurity that I never could have reached. So there's kind of trade-offs there. Um, and then, yeah, I guess the last con I wrote on my list is it can feel really vulnerable to be just telling other growers that are your neighbors or whatever, like exactly what your plan is for next year. So there's like definitely just like a little, it feels a little scary. Um, like I said before, I think it's worth it, but it's definitely, yeah, there's some vulnerability there. But I think you can't really build trusting relationships without vulnerability. So um, it can feel a little scary at first to just say like, here's my plan. So anyway, those are kind of the pros and cons I wrote based on my experience the last year.
Thank you so much. I know I certainly have like some follow-up questions, but if anyone in the chat has any, please feel free to drop them in there, and I'll save them till the end. But before that, I'm just going to pass it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Madeline, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And thank you, Katie, for sharing your perspective as a farmer. It's all valid things that I hear on a regular basis. I too am a farmer. I own Daily Blessings Farm, but today I'm going to speak from the hat that I wear as the executive director of the Josephine County Farm Collective. And we've been supporting, we started with 4 just producers that we had a good relationship with to start collaborating during the pandemic, and we are now supporting 40 local growers, ranchers, bakers, and food makers of all different sorts from 5 counties in Coos, Curry, Douglas, Jackson, and Josephine County. And we are also purchasing and selling to Klamath Grown. So we are now sister food hubs doing regional food movement too. And so I'm going to dive a little deeper into just the steps and tools that we use as a collaborative crop planning specifically, and then kind of the how that how that impacts the end game, because really we're planning sometimes 9 months to a year out, trying to foresee what things are going to look like when the growers all start harvesting and it all goes for sale. So we're trying to plan that far in advance with all of our different growers. So generally, as far as using a collaborative crop planner, we only use that for diversified vegetables, fruit, and herbs. Everything else is pretty specialized. And we're always looking for ways to meet the demands of the consumers while increasing the sales opportunities for producers at the same time. And we have expanded now beyond the direct to consumer. We are now selling through 4 different price lists. So we have our retail, our CSA price list, which gives all buyers of 5% off the retail price if you become a CSA subscriber. We have our wholesale channels that go out to restaurants generally. And then we have our institutions, which are our hospitals and health centers we work with quite a bit, our schools, and then our regional food hubs that we move food from one region to another to make sure we're filling gaps and continually having a diversified selection year round. So this is the time of year when we have a higher demand because most of the farmers markets have started to close and it becomes harder to find fresh produce. But generally, we work with all perishables. We do have a few shelf-stable items and added value, but that's only about, I would say, 5 to 7% of our product lineup. So our mission is to support all agricultural producers. We don't turn anyone away. So it's really in the producer's best interest to plan collaboratively if you fall within one of those categories of vegetables, fruits, and herbs. because we also want to offer as much diversity as possible for the longest period of time to consumers. That is the attractive component of buying from a food hub. It's a one-stop shop that still supports all the local producers. Um, and that's really attractive for institutions and wholesales as well, as the direct to consumers, because it just saves time. You know, nobody has time to like drive around to 10 different grocery stores when they can do it all in one stop. You know, time is important. And then having some flexible options for consumers as far as building their own box and having things that meet all their dietary habits and preferences. Ours is a customizable CSA and marketplace. So, it's very flexible to meet people's needs. They can have a box weekly or once a month or every other week. It's very flexible. We also have a pickup and we have delivery too. So, I do want to ask the group. I'm kind of an interactive speaker, so if you want to come off camera for a minute, I'm going to ask you, when you go to the farmers market, what do you see as far as product diversity? Anybody want to chime in, or do I have to call on somebody? I know some of you out there. Bobby, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm gonna keep my camera off, but
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, as far as product diversity, I see a pretty wide range of products at my local farmers market. So you have an option for different types of meat and eggs, and definitely more vegetable or fresh produce than any other category of food, and then a handful of like bakers.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody have a different experience?
This is Robert Turvey. I'm in Castle Rock, and we're the Cowlitz County, just over north of Vancouver. And we're so low on produce that really only what we're only really getting produce from one or two local farms for the entire county, and then from Yakima kind of area. So our stuff is very standard and very limited. So you'll get, maybe two kinds of tomatoes, just not a lot of crop diversity because there's just not a lot of young farmers or new and emerging farmers. There's just nothing here.
Thank you, Robert, for sharing. Yep. Very valid. Zoe, let's hear from Zoe. What's your experience? What do you see at the farmers market?
I live in Corvallis, which is very abundant. There's a lot of diversity at our farmers market, but also a lot of redundancy between farms.
Yes.
So,
Thank you. And those are all really valid reasons to work as a collaborative. So when you crop plant together, you take some proactive steps to avoid all that redundancy. So everyone isn't offering the same red slicer tomato at the same time. Or you can space out your successions for lettuce harvesting. Or you can bring in people who are growing under protected cover and can use those shoulder seasons while your other producers are filling in the gaps. And then you start to address issues that Robert mentioned, where you start to bring in products from outside. You start closest to home and you start to move out a little bit and bringing in things to fill in those gaps. And that's when I call Klamath Grown, because they have a season that's a little bit off by from ours. I can get summer crops from Klamath in May, and we're just planting because they have this a magical geothermically heated soil. And I can get green beans and tomatoes from Klamath when we're just planting. And then the reverse is happening right now. So they're ordering from us now to fill in the gaps. So what we want to try to do is maintain that product diversity for as long a period as we can, and avoid all that redundancy at the market. What's most important, I think, as a food hub is finding a good fit. And a food hub is not a good fit for everyone. I will say that I'm going to show you in a few minutes what the different tools we use to manage that crop planning, but we've had most success doing that data ourselves. We started asking our producers to input, lists of what they're planning on growing, and then some of them partook in that and some did not. And so it's really not effective unless everyone participates. So now we take it upon ourselves. It's part of our application process to kind of gather some information on what's on your roadmap. What do you plan on growing? And then when we onboard our producers, we dive in a little bit deeper. We're trying to avoid those duplications, create some space between overlapping successions, fill those gaps. But it also recognizes some gaps too for our producers. So we have some producers that will come on, and when we start to have a conversation about what their plan is, they'll say, I think I want to grow garlic. And we're like, that's awesome. We have 5 garlic growers already, but no one else is growing this, and this. So is that of interest to you? And we also want to address, what are you successful at? Because that's really a good place to start. And all those things that Katie mentioned, I have been through with multiple producers as well. All of them growing 40 to 70 different varieties. And so let's just scale that down to 10 and then larger volumes. And when all of your farms start to do that, we have seen much more success. They start to streamline their operations. That reduces their costs because they become more efficient, and they become, in the end, more profitable as well. And it reduces that competition. Okay, let's see. The other benefit I want to mention in crop planning is it kind of provides more balance. As Katie mentioned, there's so much pressure for you to fill a CSA by yourself. You can't have a death in the family. You can't get married or have a baby. You can't even leave for a weekend because you got to keep it going for those 18 weeks. There's just no breath. And so what I have noticed is our producers are taking a breath. They're like, I'm going to take a week off and I'm going to take my family and go to the coast. And it is completely transparent to our customers because another producer steps in and fills that gap. And then they take their turn. And it has provided some really nice and much needed balance in their lives. Okay, so let me share my screen with this little tool. It's nothing like super fancy, folks, but it works. Okay, I think it's this one. All right, can you see this? Can you see this 2025 Farm Collective Commodity Plan? Okay, so you can see I'm going to start on this first tab. This is our template. And at this point that we pull this document up, we've already gotten an application from our producer, and we have the producer during our onboarding go down this column B. And you can see we have 3 sections. There's our vegetables, and we just ask our producer check every box that you might possibly grow this year. And that only takes them a couple of minutes because they are either a vegetable or a fruit grower or herbs. And then we make each one their own tab because then we dive a little bit deeper. And I'm going to jump over here to Dandelion Fields. And we start to talk about what their plan is for the year. And this is generally done sometime between January and April. Because by May they're planting. So we want to try to do most of this in January and February because that's when people are buying their seeds. We don't want them to spend more than they need, but we want them to have a good plan in mind. And so having this discussion starts to bring up some things like, when are you planting? When are you going to have your field, and what are your successions? If you're doing, lettuce or whatever, repetitive plantings. And so this gives us an idea of when they're going to harvest. So you can see how Dandelion Fields has garlic planned for, we're going to do scapes in May, and then she's going to be harvesting garlic for the rest of the season. She's got sweet corn coming in September and October, and she has a few ground cherries in there, but mostly she's a specialty pepper grower. And so I'm not going to really see anything from Stacy's farm until June. And so I'm just going to keep checking in with her every couple of months and say, hey, did you get that planted? Are you still on schedule? And so when I have this conversation with every farm as we're doing our onboarding, then I start to see patterns and gaps. So I'm going to jump over here now to Ferry Road Farm. And she, for the most part, is an orchard. So she mostly has fruit, but she likes to dabble in some of those vegetables as well. She has a small market garden. But it's nice to know we had 2 or 3 orchards, and two of our 3 orchards lost their farms this year. So Ferry Road Farm was our only orchard fruit for the year. And that didn't happen until like June, which is really unfortunate. But you can see, once you start to get a page made for every producer, you start to see gaps. So by April, that's when we start to get calls from our new farms that are first-time farms or second year, and they're like, I'm thinking I'd like to do this. We have a nice roadmap of what everybody's going to do. And we can say, we would love to have you on board. If you want to diversify that a little bit and maybe target some other crops, you would have more opportunity. We're not going to twist anybody's arm, but we have a nice snapshot of what's going to be coming down our way in the next 6 to 9 months. So that's kind of what it looks like. I haven't figured out how to map this all to one page, which would be really nice. But it gives you an idea of what's coming. And then sometimes I will go so far, like as far as tomatoes go, because everyone plants tomatoes. Sometimes I will go as far to document what varieties, because there's just so many out there. You can still have everybody growing tomatoes, but maybe somebody wants to focus on cherries, and somebody else wants to just do heirlooms, or someone just wants to do paste and target, an institution that just wants to make sauce. So we have a lot of school districts call us and say, and it's always last minute. They're like, I need 500 pounds of grapes by Friday. And so I need to know who has grapes, because I don't have time to call. And that's why they're calling me as a food hub. So I need to know who has grapes and who can I call. And together, we don't have to rely on one producer to put together that order. I can pull that from as many producers as I can get a hold of to make that order and still support all local growers. Okay. Any questions about that tool?
Folks were asking if you'd be willing to share the copy with them.
Oh, sure. Can I just send it to you, Madeline?
Yeah, I'll send that out in the follow-up email.
Yeah, and then the other thing I want to share, because we're, slowing down this time of year, but we're already ramping up for next year. So the marketplace that we use is Local Food Marketplace. Sorry, I just have so many tabs open here. And I was already looking at, because we're thinking about next year already. So I can actually go look at what I had listed for the last 2 years. So I want to know, when did I start to get fruit, or, and I can search by producer, or I can search by fruits when, oh yeah, I was getting strawberries, and that was in in June. It really helps me plan as a food hub to know when those things are going to start coming in and where they came from. These were my strawberries from my farm. But if I wanted to know when Ruby at Prairie Road Farms started delivering fruit, I might want to look here. Oh yeah, I was getting Gala apples. So having that history is really helpful. So if you're a grower, I would highly recommend you keep some of your own records. So you start to develop that data of your own farm and records, because it's not only going to help you, it's going to help you tell your customers when you're going to have things available. Okay. Any questions there? Have to get back to my notes. Give me a second here.
If anyone has any, feel free to come off mute or throw up a hand.
Let's see. I think just generally, the results of doing this together in collaboration with all the producers, one of the things that we do for them is all that customer service, and I don't knock that man, because there are some whiny complainers out there. Like, there's a tiny little mark, a bug bite on my squash, and let me tell you, we're handling all that for you. We're handling all of the billing, everybody's credit card that gets rejected, all the SNAP processing, all your double up food bucks. We're writing grants to get your protein subsidies. We're contracting with the state to process your WIC for you. So yeah, so if your food hub wants to charge you, $100 a year, give it some thought into what you're going to pay, to do all that yourself. Because just the SNAP equipment's like $900 a year. And then you have like all these other credit card processing fees and whatnot associated. And Katie's right. Yeah, we have some staff now too. Thank goodness, because I did it by myself for years. We also conducted some consumer product surveys. So now we have producers coming to us saying, what do people want? And we know now what we have missing. We know people want mushrooms and honey and coffee. And like, where am I going to find locally grown coffee? I'm probably not, but I might find locally roasted. But it tells us that we can share that with our consumers, what they don't want too. Like, we surveyed, and like mushroom jerky was bottom of the list. Either they don't know what that is, or it's just not in demand. So don't waste your time processing mushrooms. Generally, it has increased profitability significantly. I'm just astonished. I can't share people's plans, but I will say we've seen some of our producers triple, even quadruple their sales by even though they have to reduce their price from what they would make at a farmer's market, the volume that they're moving makes up the difference. And so you have to rely on your food hub to be pushing that agenda to increase your volume. I will say, I'm going to put on Katie's hat for a second. One of the cons is sometimes you don't have a guarantee of that volume. And so if you have to drive a certain distance for a small delivery, that's very costly for a producer, Like, we have my market manager just left to go meet one of our producers because she sold 2 things, and she lives in Cave Junction, which is 45 miles away. And she's going to come and deliver it, but that's very costly for her. So just some things to keep in mind. We want it to be a good fit. We want it to be offering some balance for our producers. We want some long-term sustainability in the program. So just a couple other services that we offer as a food hub is we have a lending library of small farm equipment. So our producers can try a piece of equipment before they invest any capital. That's a pretty huge savings, and I think it's pretty unique. I don't know any other food hubs doing that. It might be unique to Josephine County. And we also have installed a licensed commercial kitchen. So we designed it specifically for producers to take that surplus and turn it into an added value product, without having to buy all of that equipment or design and install your own commercial kitchen. I will tell you, it cost us about $75,000 to install a licensed commercial kitchen. So, if you needed to know for budget purposes, that's what it cost us. And that was not including the building. That was just the little kitchen space and the equipment. That's a lot. I think that was it. I think I will open it up for any questions for Katie and I at this point. Madeline, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. We are coming up against 4, but I'm happy to hang out for a little bit longer if folks have questions. I see one from Kelly. If you had any tips for farmers collaborating for the first time on starting a collaborative CSA or online marketplace, what would you tell them?
Are are you a farmer or a food hub? Who's this, Kelly?
They're farmers. They are from Flat Tack Farm.
I would say start with people you get along with and that have similar aligned goals. That's really important. I think everything else you can work out if you're unified in that vision. Start small.
Yeah, I would say because I was part of starting Klamath Grown as a little itty bitty online farmers market, and I think that's really good advice, Carrie. I would also say that I think the back end admin is always more than you think it's going to be, and so figuring out how you're going to distribute that labor fairly and if there's any way to pay somebody to do that. And that's so hard to do when you're first starting. Sometimes you have to build something and then you say like, look at what we have. And then you apply for a grant and then they say no. And then you apply for another grant and then eventually somebody says yes. But you have to kind of build something first. And that's the most difficult phase is building it just out of your spare time, which farmers have zero of. So just really account for that work.
I kind of had a curiosity along that point you were making of starting with people you know and have friendships with and have that level of trust with. Have you experienced any like conflict between farmers maybe wanting to grow the same thing or sell the same thing and not being able to buy in the quantities that they want because you had committed to another grower, or like during the planning phase, having to kind of set boundaries around how much of what you would be able to accept from a certain producer?
Yes.
And how do you handle that?
So we have an agreement and we are very upfront. We cannot guarantee a certain amount of order every week. And I will say most of our producers are so excited. They're like, yes, I'm signing all the agreements. And then halfway through the season, about the 6th week, when they got like a $30 order and they have to drive 45 miles to deliver that $35 order, they're getting upset. They're like, it's not worth my time anymore. You know, and then they start to throw out like, okay, you're gonna have to make a $200 order. So it starts to pivot. It starts to pivot, and we start to be seen as a wholesale customer more than a food hub. And a lot of all that administrative work that we're doing on before, where I mean, we're promoting CSA, we're doing all that marketing and advertising 6 months before it even starts. And then we're doing all the billing and delivery and distribution and housing and refrigeration and utilities and packing and staffing. All of that kind of gets forgotten. It is a balancing act, definitely, to make sure that all of our producers get a piece of the pie every week. And so we try to keep reinforcing that. We want to make sure it's very equitable for all of our producers. And the more that they diversify their crop planning and their product offering, the more opportunities that they're going to have. You know, if everyone has cherry tomatoes for 10 weeks, I'm just going to have to rotate your cherry tomatoes, right? If you want to diversify that a little bit, I have more options. So keep that in mind.
I will add to that. I think Klamath Grown is organizes the product, like it runs the Harvest Box program a tiny bit differently. I would say as me as a farmer, like I have for Klamath Grown, I sell, I tell them what I have, and Delaney goes in and chooses from my inventory what she wants for the Harvest Box that week. And then the rest of what I have gets posted on the online market. Right now, as a farmer, if I had to choose which of these like sales outlets to drop, it would be the online market. And I would definitely keep the Harvest Box, which is the collaborative CSA. Because the collaborative CSA, even though I don't have a guarantee that they're going to choose my stuff every week, when they do choose my stuff, is 35 of them. And as they grow in popularity, hopefully it'll be 50 or 60, whatever units. And the online market is never guaranteed. It's like, oh, I sold 2 bunches of kale. Let me drive those 2 bunches of kale, which is only like a 15-minute drive. But anyway, so there's a little bit of a difference there for me. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the Harvest Box program, because the more of those boxes they can sell, just the more streamlined and efficient my operation can become. And I don't have to deal with the fiddly online market sales.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I know we're going over 4. Do you want me to, can I add on to that? Okay. If y'all have to go, I understand. But it is a constant battle with trying to switch that narrative between reserving what you need for the farmer's market first and offering the rest to the marketplace versus offering to the marketplace first and taking what doesn't sell ahead of time to the farmer's market. Because if you go to the farmer's market, you make more money, right? Because you're getting a higher retail price. If I sell to the food hub, it's a lower price. But if it's going to a CSA, it's usually a big chunk all at once. So it's really hard. And I would say it's different for every producer. Some of them would love nothing more than to go to 4 farmers markets a week. I have other producers that would love nothing, that they'd hate going to the farmers market. They're like, I can't think of anything more miserable than standing in a tent in the heat or the rain at the farmers market all day. Like, I have better things to do. So, you just have to find a good fit. How do I plan ahead for boxes when they're fully customizable? So I preload everyone's boxes with what is offered to me by the producers. And then the customer has 3 days to swap. So they can delete, they can add, they can swap. They basically rebuild their box. So, or not. Some of them never even look.
That's interesting. I didn't realize you had a swap option. That's kind of cool.
Mhm.
All right. We are 5 minutes over. Thank you both for staying on. I really appreciate it. For those of you who are still here, I dropped a survey link in there. It's literally 4 questions. You answer, rank them 1 to 5. It helps us with our grant reporting. It means a lot to us as a nonprofit if you'd fill it out. Thank you all for your time. If you had another question that comes up later, please feel free to email it to me and I can pass it along to our lovely speakers. And I will be following up with an email with the recording and all the resources I mentioned. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Katie and Carrie, again. Appreciate you both so much.
Bye. Thanks, Katie. Thanks,
Thank
Katie.
you.
Bye. Okay.